In 1967, as governor of California, he pushed the university system to start charging students tuition so they would, quote, think twice about whether they wanted to pay to carry a picket sign.
The Philadelphia Move organization was a Black liberation group who strongly believed in animal liberation as well.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. Mohammed, el-Kurd, poet and Sheikh Jarrah resident and activist, spoke on November 29th to the United Nations on the Day of Solidarity with the people of Palestine. We present you his brief remarks.
I know that the occupation will end. Like all injustices, it will end. It must. All empires fall. The Palestinian cause will erupt victorious. I know this. I know that people will look back at the reality we live through today with so much moral clarity. One day there will be museums honoring us, memorials in our remembrance, and statues built in our names. People will stand atop our lands and acknowledge the suffering that happened in them. I just hope that such recognition, such recourse, such reparations happen while the Palestinian people are still here. We deserve justice and liberation within our lifetime. We deserve our land back. Thank you very much.
It's been over a month since Israel declared 6 Palestinian prominent human rights and civil society organizations as terrorist groups. Member of Congress Betty McCollum sponsored a resolution condemning the action. To our shame, only 11 members of the House have joined with her as co-sponsors. Very likely, your member of Congress didn't have the guts to join them. As Defense of Children International Palestine is banned, note this graphic showing the number of Palestinian children killed this year. Speaking of lack of guts, the U.S. Senate voted to allow the carnage in Yemen to continue. Specifically, they voted to allow Biden's $650 million arms sale to Saudi Arabia to proceed. Only 20 or so of the Democrats voted to stop the sale. When Trump was in office, they spoke out furiously, particularly Chris Murphy of Connecticut. But now Biden is president, and they are quiet and supportive of a Democratic president. Biden made all kinds of promises about how he would make Saudi Arabia a pariah, etc., etc. But now he's become realistic. It's enough to give hypocrisy a bad name. You can see how each senator voted by going to our website and to our Saudi archive and clicking here. And finishing with Saudi-occupied Arabia, exiled Saudi dissident Ali al-Ahmed reports that the regime has abolished the powerless municipal councils that were heralded by Condoleezza Rice some years ago as a wonderful sign of Saudi reform. Speaking of our website, we're making a change. For 15 years or so, our website looked like this. But we're gradually moving our material to our website, thestrugglevideo.org. It's a so-called secure site, the same kind that banks and stores use. This is the video site. This arrow points to a tab, The Struggle. When you click on it, you get to the page with links to all our video, headlines, archives, photos, and memes. In the upper corner is a link to upcoming events. Coming back a page. Click or scroll down to the headlines. Scroll down to archives. And to pictures. And to memes. Now from Democracy Now!, an idea about getting Americans out from under the crushing burden of debt. Americans owe, get this, $15 trillion in debt. The idea to get out of this is called Jubilee.
During his campaign, Biden vowed to cancel federal student loan debt and fix the broken student loan system. But his administration has said the extension pausing payments through next January would be the final one. For more on the debt crisis, we'll be joined in a minute by Astra Taylor, co-founder of the Debt Collective, a union for debtors. But first, I want to turn to her new animated short film she's publishing today at The Intercept with illustrations by artist Molly Crabapple called Your Debt is Someone Else's Asset.
The American dream used to be owning your own home. Now it's being debt-free. Altogether, Americans owe a record-breaking $15 trillion and counting. Sold as a lifeline, debt is too often an anchor, dragging people down with compounding interest and fees, pulling wealth and resources from the working class to bloat Wall Street's bottom line. Every debt we hold is someone else's asset, with our monthly payments providing steady revenue streams for greedy creditors. Households with credit card debt pay around $1,155 a year in interest alone. Americans now die owing an average of $62,000, much of it credit card debt. A significant amount of the $770 billion of credit card debt sloshing around is medical bills, ambulance rides, doctor's visits, and surgeries paid for with the swipe of a little plastic card. Then there's the additional $140 billion of medical debt and collections, combined with an estimated $50 billion in back rent and $1.4 trillion in auto loans. Much of this debt didn't exist a few generations ago. Consider the $1.8 trillion in student loans this country now holds, which wasn't a problem in the 1960s when college was often free, or close to it. Ronald Reagan helped change that. He made his name by demonizing protesters on the University of Berkeley campus. In 1967, as governor of California, he pushed the university system to start charging students tuition so they would, quote, think twice about whether they wanted to pay to carry a picket sign. During his career as senator, Joe Biden advanced Reagan's project, working to expand student lending. As a senator from Delaware, the credit card industry capital, Biden was a devoted servant of the financial sector. He fought relentlessly for 2005 legislation that weakened borrower protections and made bankruptcy more difficult for regular borrowers, strengthening the hand of the student loan and credit card industries and helping cause a wave of home foreclosures. But debt is not just about money. It's about power. Debt has long been both a source of profit and a tool of social control and racial domination. The Founding Fathers knew this. Thomas Jefferson argued that debt should be canceled after natural limits, which he took to be about a generation, but only for white men like himself. In 1803, he wrote that debt should be used as a weapon against indigenous people to steal their territory. We shall be glad to see the good and influential individuals among them run in debt, because we observe that when these debts get beyond what the individuals can pay, they become willing to lop them off by a cession of lands. Sharecropping, redlining, predatory lending all continued this trend, deepening racial inequities. As a result of the 2008 mortgage crisis, Black and brown families lost upwards of 50% of their collective wealth. For regular debtors, even a late payment can spell disaster. A tanked credit score can make it impossible to rent an apartment or get a job. Default on your student loans? The government can seize your wages, tax refunds, and Social Security. Debtors' prisons are technically unconstitutional, but in practice, people struggling to pay medical bills or court fees can wind up in jail. But not all debtors are treated so cruelly. Rich people regularly walk away from their obligations, and companies engage in strategic defaults. The banks that crashed the economy in 2008, they got bailed out. Donald Trump, the self-professed king of debt, left a string of corporate bankruptcies in his wake. And don't forget that during the COVID pandemic, the federal government spent hundreds of billions of dollars buying up bad corporate debt belonging to entities including Exxon and Walmart, and offering companies, including payday lenders, forgivable loans. It's time regular debtors got a break, too. It's time for a jubilee, the erasure of debts and a rebalancing of power between regular people and elites. It's not a new idea. Jubilee was described in the Bible, and many ancient civilizations had periodic jubilees to avert social and economic collapse. Our earliest recorded histories are stone tablets inscribed with credit ledgers. Nearly as long as debt has existed, debt cancellation has existed too. Throughout history, debtors have risen up to demand relief. In the early 6th century BCE, a debtors' riot helped nudge ancient Athens towards democracy. The reforms, known as the shaking off of burdens, included debt absolution and an end to debt bondage. Something similar happened in ancient Rome after debtors mounted the world's first general strike. In the United States, indebted workers and farmers revolted in the colonial era, and then again during the Great Depression. Later, the call for debt cancellation rang out at Occupy Wall Street. In recent years, striking debtors helped force the government to cancel billions of dollars in student loans. Abolishing medical debt, back rent, and student loans would free up money now spent on debt servicing for other things. People could buy homes and start families, and the racial wealth gap would narrow. Research estimates that canceling student debt alone would boost the economy by up to $108 billion a year and create 1 million jobs. Under pressure from activists, President Biden campaigned on a promise to cancel an immediate minimum of $10,000 of student debt per borrower. Thanks to the Higher Education Act of 1965, he has the power to cancel all federal student loans. With a single signature on an executive order, President Biden can free people from student debt, giving tens of millions of people their lives and futures back. Now, we need to make him do it, and much more. We deserve nothing less than a jubilee.
That's the new animated short film, Your Debt is Someone Else's Asset, published today at The Intercept with illustrations, remarkable illustrations by the artist Molly Crabapple.
Now, the third section of the Mark Shafer lecture this year, given by radical vegan Christopher Sebastian.
And you see it playing out actually in political circles, in political races, like all around the country. This is actually from 2020. And again, like this might be familiar to some people. This is the Senate race that some of you may remember if you're coming to us from the United States here, between Jon Ossoff, who is the then 37-year-old Senate candidate, the Democratic Senate candidate, against Senator David Perdue in Georgia. And Ossoff, of course, being like I said, 37 years old, Democratic candidate and Jewish. And he launched his campaign by actually going to Slutty Vegan, which is a restaurant in Atlanta. And it's a obviously vegan restaurant. It's literally in the name, and it's owned by a Black woman. And so what's he symbolizing by going here? Like you can see from the tweet on the left, he's showing up to Slutty Vegan in support of this business. And this is how he kicked off his campaign that first weekend. What is he signifying? Support for local businesses, support for the Black community. And he's also underscoring his understanding of the climate crisis, because one of the things that we need to focus on in order to help to mitigate the worst effects of climate change is food consumption, in particular livestock, which is a huge and under-discussed contributor to climate change. And so these are these are some of the things that he's signifying. So it's the absence of the consumption of animals that is being utilized or instrumentalized in this campaign. And just a few hours later, in the tweet on the right from Team Perdue, you can see that he's saying Ossoff can have the plant burger. We'll take the all-star special. Pick your side, Georgia. which, by the way, Georgia actually did because Ossoff won that race. Now, like whether or not it's because he went to a vegan restaurant, like we're not going to say that like that it's specifically for that reason. But like, but you can see playing out in real time between these two tweets, the use of animals or the instrumentalizing of animals in this way, in the objectification of them. Because in the image that Purdue actually has, you've got this traditional image of him sitting in the Waffle House with his arms swung around his wife. Very traditional values are what he's signifying here. But literally, he foregrounds the consumption of animals. And he's shunning the absence of animals, or the not eating of animals, and it's a very specific choice of animal foods too, because once again bacon becomes such a motif that you see being utilized over and over again, especially when people are dog whistling white supremacist like ideas. These things are always, they're constantly operating in the background, although they're invisible to us because we don't realize how deeply entrenched the consumption of, objectification of, and exploitation of animals is in our everyday culture. And you see the industries themselves actually, they get in on the act too, and they participate in this as well. This is from a quote from Beef Magazine, and they're doing the fear mongering too. It's like an almost religious call and response. The fight for the center of the dinner plate is on. If tofu, beans, and lentils become the #1 recommendation as the plant-based protein substitutes to beef, then we've not only failed our own industry, but we've failed the children, military, hospital patients, and nursing home residents who will eat according to the new dietary guidelines for America. And so again, you see so many familiar tropes, think of the children. Oh my God, we don't want to fail the children. Fealty to the military, military worship, support our troops. Like hospital patients, veterans, nursing homes, up will become down, black will become white, the sky is going to fall, and the bricks will come out of the ceiling. These are the things that are going to happen if people eat tofu and beans and lentils. Oh my God, no. It has to be beef. This is a fundamental attack on our identity as American people, as good people. It's an attack on our freedom. And you also see this with the American Beef Battalion. And yes, there's actually an American Beef Battalion. This is a website that you can go to. You can find it online, and this is their homepage. And you can see the purpose. It's in very small letters, so I actually wrote it again. Purpose is written across the bottom. Organize and sponsor steak feeds, entertainment, programs, meetings, and projects with service members and their families. Encourage and assist them in any reasonable manner. Foster among the people of the United States an appreciation, respect, and honor for our military service members whose sacrifices have and will continue to make our freedoms possible. We're literally wrapping beef up in the American flag. And their last line literally says, and will continue to make our freedoms possible. Beef is symbolic of freedom in these United States. And indeed, again, around the world, because as I mentioned earlier, American imperialism is not confined to America. It never takes a day off, and it very rarely sleeps. And so this is the violence that we are that we're actually projecting to everyone else. And it literally starts with violence against other animals and turning actual meaningful persons. And animals are persons in every way. Personhood is literally conferred to animals in a variety of ways, and we recognize it on an individual level, if not a systemic level. We turn these persons into objects by treating them as exploitable resources. And then we make those exploitable resources symbolic of our own freedom. And so this is these are the things that that are representative of my veganism and what it means to me. I actually had one more slide. You know what? Forget it. I'm going to see if I can find it right now. No, I can't. I didn't. I thought that I had my other presentation that I borrowed it from. But there was actually a slide showing the pastor Rick Wiles, who was railing against the consumption of of plant-based burgers, and saying that actually consuming plant-based burgers is part of a Luciferian plot. And it was designed to change your DNA so that you cannot inherit the kingdom of God. Christian evangelical circles are deeply wrapped up in a lot of white nationalism, and have very little to do with Christianity. What was really interesting about his quote is that he also said that consumption of plant food is designed to make you not be human, because that would create a soulless individual. And that is how, like, you would not be able to inherit the kingdom of God. And it's that use of, once again, human as a signifier. And he literally was saying that, like, unless you consume meat, then you are not human. And again, human, or human as a political identity, is deeply, deeply wedded to whiteness, as it was constructed literally hundreds of years before we were born. But yeah, like, with all of these examples, and I'm wrapping up here because I'm looking at my clock and I'm trying to be mindful of time. What do we do with all of this information? What do we do? Like, this is where, like, where we start to talk about solutions, or, like, how veganism, or at least veganism, the way that I experience it, that I interpret it for myself, in terms of liberation for Black people and for animals, and literally collective liberation for all of us on this planet, because it's so deeply tied to, like, like the environment and the ecological crisis that we're facing. I turn to this quote. There's a lot of work that I do that is inspired by Black feminism. And this is a quote from Angela Davis, who is herself vegan. And she says, straight Black men and white women will always be the weakest links and thank you for including Sis Laura, in the struggle for equality, because they view equality as achieving status with white men. The problem with that is that white men's status is contingent on the oppression of other people. And I think that this is such a daring quote from Davis, because I think that it encapsulates so much of our attitudes toward other animals. We don't view equality, like we have such a warped view of equality, rather. We have such a warped view of freedom and of liberation that we imagine liberation, or we conceive of it only through the lens of, like, having or achieving the status that white men have already had. We want to be human like these white men. We want to experience humanity the way that white people have taught us to do. And as David says, the problem with that is that white men's status is contingent on the oppression of other people. And so often we think that we can build our liberation on the backs of someone else's oppression. And that's what happens with animals all the time, because we don't even consider them to be persons. They are so, their invisibility is so complete to us in our liberation struggles. And so I can't conceive of a way that we can actually have a peace, an enduring peace or any kind, without actually recognizing that violence is real and that we are perpetuating it every time we erase the struggles of other animals and communities of animals as minoritized persons themselves. And we see this, like, this is actually a tweet, and there are dozens, if not hundreds, of tweets like this out there. People are always dunking on veganism in one way or another. And it scores us so many, like, so many delicious cookies in online spaces. And you can see this tweet and the conversation that it ensued from it, like, if you go on Twitter. This one's from Happy She, but the concept of veganism was developed under capitalism's neocolonialism blending with orthorexia, AKA the idea that food can be pure or impure. And it's designed to make people associate poverty and food poor people eat with disease in order to see them as the problem. And then, like, in a reply, like, someone else is saying, veganism is a gateway to white supremacy, and it's very concerning. Vegans are some of the most vile and anti-indigenous people I've ever seen. And this is what's, like, what's so disturbing to me, is that, like, people are saying this and they're so ignorant of, like, of the history of veganism, the actual history of capitalism. And there is this almost need to confine veganism to a way of eating or a diet, rather than a recognition that, like, our lives and our entire lifestyles, the foundation of us, like, in Western society, is built on animal exploitation. And so if we can confine veganism to a diet and tell people, oh, you're trying to tell poor people how to eat, or you're creating a disordered style of eating. If we can do that, we don't have to actually confront our bigotry toward other animals. We don't have to confront our speciesism. We don't have to confront our biophobia. We don't have to confront, like, all of these other things and all of these other anxieties and fears that are wrapped up in our treatment of all of the other people with whom we share the natural world, who are not human. And that's what we end up doing repeatedly. And yeah, like, the idea that veganism is a gateway to white supremacy, without recognizing that, like, it's actually the consumption of animals that white supremacists and white nationalists are actually utilizing and instrumentalizing in order to rally their people together, is a complete absurdity. It is a fiction that has been built in our minds in order to avoid having to confront our own bigotry and the ways that we are so horrifically discriminatory to other animal persons. And the reality is that, like, vegan food or plant-based food has always been associated with poverty, or with, like, it's always been meat that has been considered a luxury item. And this is deliberate and intentional rewriting of history that we engage in over and over again. And it's so heartbreaking and it's so disappointing. And these are the people that really, really need veganism the most and actively reject it in order to protect our bigotries. And it's hurtful. But there is a way back. And there is a history of this as well. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the MOVE organization, but the Philadelphia MOVE organization was a Black liberation group who strongly believed in animal liberation as well. They existed in the 1970s and 1980s. They're still there. But it was 1985 when the MOVE bombing occurred. The city of Philadelphia actually dropped a bomb on the MOVE house on Osage Avenue and killed 11 people, including, I believe, 5 or 6 children. And I believe it was 6 children and 5 adults, and countless companion animals that they had taken in who were experiencing houselessness, and literally burned Black people alive for the crime of actually reclaiming our power. And this is what was so scary about the MOVE organization to the institutions of white supremacy. They recognized that Black liberation and animal liberation didn't have to occur separate from one another.
As we record, news has come that the Kellogg Corporation is threatening to fire all of its workers who have been out on strike since October. What a bunch of, as Shakespeare wrote, abortive rooting hogs. And as we prepared this script, I heard that someone or some group took down the Kellogg application website. How shocking! That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.